Welcome back. I've received a flurry of feedback on a video that I released a couple weeks ago about Taylor Swift and her advice on forgiveness. In case you've missed it, here's the video in question.
You know, people go on and on about like you have to forgive and forget to move past something. No, you don't. You don't have to forgive and you don't have to forget to move on. You can move on without any of those things happening. You just become indifferent and then you move on.
Do you believe in forgiveness?
Yes, absolutely. Like for people that are important in your life who have added, you know, who have enriched your life and made it better, and also there's been some struggle and some bad stuff too. But I think that, you know, if something's toxic and it's only ever really been that, what are you gonna do? It's like, just move on, it's fine.
So I did a response to this video, and you can check it out via the link in the description below. I published it and then received a lot of really interesting feedback. But something that was really striking to me was that although the majority of these comments didn't necessarily hold a negative view of the video, they certainly held either a negative view or a warped view of the idea of forgiveness in general. It was like people were bending over backwards to either not use the word forgiveness at all, or to replace it with a different word like acceptance or something, or they were to present forgiveness in a very negative view, like as if it was a gateway to abuse, or if it was something that is weak, or something that will allow toxic people to take over your life. And it just seemed like people were absolutely terrified of forgiveness, which was really quite surprising. So when filtering through the comments, I was reminded by a tweet that's in Tim Keller's book, Forgive, and this is what the tweet says. There's just something unsustainable about an environment that demands constant atonement, but actively disdains the very idea of forgiveness. And man, did I see that in the comments. It's like people absolutely loathe the idea of forgiveness. They want nothing to do with it. Yet at the same time, they expect to be fully atoned for their own wrongdoings. It's crazy. So let's start by answering the question, what is forgiveness? Because this is probably one of the biggest frustrations that I had when I was chatting with people, is that almost always we had different definitions of what forgiveness actually is. And so let's talk about that. Here is the definition of forgiveness that I like to use, and I used this definition when I was conversing with a lot of people in the comments. Forgiveness is diagnosing exactly what transgression occurred in the given situation, and if the opposite party is at fault, choosing not to hold them in your debt for an indeterminate period of time. Because when you think about it, the word forgiveness is actually an economic term. And so to forgive is to forgive a debt. It's to forgive something that is being owed to you. And Tim Keller does a really good job of explaining this. He talks about how when someone wrongs you, usually an external debt occurs. So for example, you lend somebody your car, they drive it into a power pole and crash it, right? And so you're left with the external debt of a wrecked car. But also when somebody wrongs you, it's always the case that internal debt emerges as well. And so you've been hurt. It's an emotional debt. And when someone wrongs you, you feel that they owe you. They owe you. And the currency of which they are to repay you is the currency of pain. You know, just because you suffered, it means that they should suffer too. And then this is when resentment emerges. And so you start to long for their downfall. You root for their pain. You long for them to suffer just the way that you've suffered. And you can start to think superior thoughts as well. Like, you know, well, I would never do what they did to me. I would never do that. And I mean, this could be a good place to point out that you can never forgive someone as long as you feel superior to them. It can't be done. So humility is required when it comes to forgiveness. But then with resentment, you start to think thoughts like, you know, well, if they continue to do what they do, well, it's going to blow up in their face. And I can't wait for that to happen. I can't wait to see them pay for it and see them suffer. And the problem with this is that if you allow this resentment to take root and then to manifest in your life, well, then you become a dark, twisted person. No one wants to be around a dark, twisted person. And you certainly don't want to be one, that's for sure. And so what happens is eventually this resentment, it catches up on you and destroys you from the inside out. So then what's the alternative? Because the debt has to be paid. I mean, it's not like a bank wiping away credit card debt with nothing, you know. There's a debt there that has to be paid. What's the alternative? Well, the alternative is that you pay it. And this is what forgiveness is. So then how do you pay it? Well, let's say when you want to scream and yell at them and run them down to their face, you don't do it. Or if maybe an opportunity arises to be able to slice down their reputation in front of a lot of other people, you don't do it. You choose not to. Or maybe something good happens to them. Maybe they get a promotion or some blessing happens in their life and you just want to yell and scream how much they don't deserve it. You pray for them instead. That's how you do it. That's how you pay the debt down. Because forgiveness is a choice, and it must be granted before it can be felt. And I think this is a mistake that a lot of people make. They think that they should feel like they should forgive someone before they can actually do it. You know, I want to get to a position where I feel like I can forgive them. But if you go by that, you're never going to forgive anybody, because you're never going to be feeling like you want to forgive them. And so it has to be granted before it can be felt. So that's what forgiveness is. Now, something that is so important about forgiveness, which I think a lot of people are missing, is that forgiveness does not mean that you downplay the wrong that occurred, and neither does it mean that reconciliation must take place. And I think a lot of people have been missing this and getting this wrong. So let's take that each in turn. So it's not downplaying the wrong that occurred. And I said this in a few comments, that forgiveness is not just slapping paint on a transgression and pretending that it never happened and expecting everything to go back to normal. Okay, that's not forgiveness. That's cowardice and that's stupidity. Forgiveness must incorporate judgment. And what I mean by that is that in order to forgive properly, you have to be able to diagnose exactly what transgression occurred and who was at fault. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, you just strip forgiveness of its power. It's like if you're not willing to admit exactly what went wrong, then your forgiveness is just arbitrary and vague. It's like, what are you even forgiving? You don't even know. And so you have to know exactly what crime occurred, no downplaying. And then once you establish that, then you can enter the path of forgiveness. And it also doesn't mean that you have to reconcile either. And there's a verse in the book of Romans from Apostle Paul, and this is what it says. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So the goal of forgiveness is to re-establish peace, and that should always be the ultimate goal. However, Apostle Paul here says, if possible, so far as it depends on you, which means that there are circumstances in which it is not possible to be able to re-establish peace, and that's completely acceptable. So if you're in a toxic relationship, and then I use that word sparingly because toxic is a word that is so overused, but if you're in a relationship and it's actually toxic, then you need to extract yourself out of that relationship, place the boundaries in your life to protect yourself, but you can still forgive them. It just means that you don't allow them to enter your life anymore. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again, and that is completely acceptable. So please, you need to drop this idea that forgiveness means downplaying the situation that occurred or reconciling with someone that's abusing you. That's not what forgiveness is. And I think this is why so many people are afraid to forgive, because they're afraid that if they forgive, then they're going to lose all power and all control over their lives, right? But that's not what forgiveness is. In fact, I would say the opposite is the case, that if you refuse to forgive someone, what you're actually doing is you're allowing the perpetrator to maintain control over your life through resentment. It's like you're drinking the poison and expecting them to die. It doesn't work. And so if you want to maintain control over your own life, the best way to do that is through forgiveness. Okay, so then do we forgive everyone, or do we only reserve our forgiveness for those in whom we deem deserve it? And that's a good question. That's something that's come up in the comments quite regularly. I think it comes back to Christian faith. So if you're a Christian, then yes, you have to forgive everyone. Why? Because it would be completely unjust if you don't. I mean, Christ forgave you, therefore you have to do likewise, right? And just read about the parable of the unforgiving servant in Matthew 18, and that'll give you everything that you need to know. And I think about C.S. Lewis. He had a great quote in his book, The Weight of Glory, and this is what he says. To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. And I think that just sums it up perfectly. I mean, for you to be forgiven by God for everything that you have done wrong in your life, and then for you to turn around and refuse to forgive someone who has wronged you, I mean, that is so hypocritical and unjust. It's beyond belief. Now, I recognize that anyone watching this who is not a Christian, you might have a hard time accepting and understanding the concept of forgiving everyone. It might be quite foreign to you, namely because you haven't experienced the ultimate forgiveness from God yourself, and you may not necessarily have the understanding of biblical application of it. And that's okay. I'm not going to say that you're off the hook in that way, but what I would say is that perhaps forgiving everyone shouldn't be something that you should write off straight away, that maybe forgiving everyone should be something that you should think about. So that's the follow-up video when it comes to Taylor Swift and her advice on forgiveness. I thought it would be just a great idea to clear up some definitions of what forgiveness is, and hopefully we can be on the same page on a few things. Keep the comments coming, by the way. Keep the discussions coming. It's really healthy for us to present ideas and to pursue the truth together. Thanks for watching this follow-up video on forgiveness. If you missed the original video, you can click on the link in the description. In the meantime, you can like this video, give it a thumbs up, and subscribe for more content.